I can check.
That's in a week. I haven't heard anything.
I can check
No, usually.
after class if you'll remind me. Okay. So we finished talking about sales transactions and recording them.
Freight costs.
Now we're moving into freight costs. So freight is shipping. And we pretty much don't buy anything these days on the internet without shipping costs. And so if you're buying something and you're having to pay the shipping on it, then that goes into like what that costs you, right? So kind of think about it that way. And everything you buy from a store, they've had to pay freight to get it there. They had to pay shipping to get it there. So then they turn around and pass that cost on to you, and the price is what they're selling. So we're going to talk about how these freight costs work in purchases and sales and how we record them, depending on what role, which side of it you're looking at. Okay, so
You did hit record, right?
I'll check.
Okay, no, that's all right.
It's not gonna hurt to check. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, it's recording. Okay, so the terms of the sale, which is not the same as the credit terms, where you're looking at like 2, 10, and 30. This is the terms of the sale where freight is concerned. And those terms indicate when the actual ownership of the stuff that's being shipped, when does it pass from the seller to the buyer. So this point determines who has to pay for the freight, the buyer or the seller. So you'll see the terms expressed as FOB shipping point, FOB destination, and FOB means free on board. So remember that. I don't know why free on. I'm sure there's some logic to it. Why is it free on board? I don't know. But just remember FOB shipping point, FOB destination. So FOB shipping point means that the buyer is responsible for the freight costs. So that means that once that merchandise leaves the seller's back dock, it becomes the property of the buyer. So it means the buyer takes responsibility for that stuff as soon as it's on the truck to come their way. FOB destination means that the seller is responsible for the freight costs. And that means that the merchandise doesn't technically change ownership until it actually gets to the buyer. So once it hits the buyer's back dock, then it's their responsibility. So technicalities, but it matters with respect to how you record the freight expense. So let's look at the first example here. We've got merchandise purchased as follows. August 15th, PC Outlet purchased $1,200 in merchandise on account from DataWorks with the shipping terms FOB shipping point. So under FOB shipping point, who is responsible for the freight?
The buyer.
It's the buyer. Okay. So we'll we got to record entries for each one of these transactions. I've left that off of your example, but on August 17th, an invoice from UPS for freight costs of $85 related to this delivery of August 15th, merchandise purchased from DataWorks was paid. I left off some stuff. All right, so we need to journalize the two transactions. Must have fallen asleep during this or got distracted. You can tell when I get distracted because stuff gets left off. Okay, or you could say paid invoice, whatever works for you. All right, so August 15th. we have $1,200 of merchandise purchased on account from DataWorks. So we will debit merchandise inventory. This goes back to the beginning of the chapter when we were purchasing inventory. So we'll debit our merchandise inventory for $1,200, and we'll credit accounts payable because they're telling us that this merchandise has been purchased on account. So we didn't pay cash for it, we're charging it and paying the vendor for it later, or the supplier for it later. Okay, because the buyer is responsible for the freight, we're going to show this cost as part of the cost of the merchandise, because they're going to combine that with their other costs and use that as a base to mark the cost up for sale. Okay, because I mean, they had to pay $85 to get that merchandise to their store. Naturally, they're going to want to account for that when they, determine a price for the merchandise so that they can recoup those freight charges. Does that make sense? So on August 17th, we will debit merchandise inventory for that freight cost of $85. And we will credit cash because it's telling us in the problem that they paid the invoice. Well, the verbiage we added indicates they paid for it. So, put pay.
I was like, where in the problem does it say?
Where I added it, where I told you to add it. Either add it here, paid invoice, or add it at the end. It was paid. So they're paying it. It was there originally. When I went in to update these things somehow or another, I wiped it off, I guess. It happens. All right, so sale of merchandise. Now we're going to look at it from the sales side. That was the purchase side. So you're purchasing merchandise. Think about it like this. Let's say you're selling, you opened yourself a shoe store and you're selling shoes. So you make a big order from Adidas and they're charging you shipping to get it there, which is natural. You can include that in part of the cost of that product because you're having to pay that cost to get it to you. It's part of the cost of buying it. So same thing like if you yourself individually, you're going to order a pair of tennis shoes off of Nike or whatever, the Nike website. And you kind of fall below that minimum order, so you have to pay the shipping costs. And that's part of the cost of the shoes you're paying, right? That's part of your price for the shoes. You got to pay the shipping. Otherwise, you're not going to get them. So logically, that freight cost is part of the cost of the shoes, right? Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. All right. So when you're selling merchandise and you are this, as the seller, are responsible for paying the freight, we're going to handle it a little bit different. Now, if we had to pay freight to get the merchandise to us when we were buying, sure, we would include that. Tax drives me crazy. We would have to include that in our cost of the merchandise, but now we're the seller. So we're having to pay to get it to you. We're going to treat it a little bit differently. We're obviously not going to add it to inventory because it's not part of our acquisition costs. We're selling it, so it's more like a selling expense. All right, so August 20th, Samuel's Distributing sold $950 in merchandise to Seltzer on account. Terms FOB destination. So if it's FOB destination, who's responsible for paying the freight?
The seller.
The seller. Okay. Cost of merchandise sold is $765. Now, what's different about this entry than the first one we made?
You're treating it as a sale rather than a purchase.
Yeah, but like we had, 2 items to account for. We had 2 lines on that first one. For a sales entry, we have 4. So you have to account for not only the sale, but the cost of what you're selling on a sales
So do you
entry.
include a freight in the cost of what you're selling?
No.
No.
That would make some sense, but no.
You
No.
just put it together right now.
I mean, it is a cost of what you're selling, but
But you separate.
we included that cost in the product cost if we had to pay to get it to us. When you're getting it to someone else as a seller, we do it a little bit different. So August 20, we have a debit to accounts receivable because we are selling to this customer on account right there. And the sales price is $9.50. Okay, so then we're going to credit sales. I'm glad you told me that about the way those entries are done because, I mean, and not to mention they change things in there. And if I don't catch that it's changed, I almost need to work through every homework problem, I guess. If only I had the time.
So they want you to treat it as you date each one.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, like they require that you put a date down.
I'm sorry. I wish I had known. All right, so cost of merchandise sold. I'll start showing them that way. Maybe that'll help.
Yeah, sorry, I posted in Pronto about it, but
yeah,
I did it at like 10:30 because I just got home from work, so I don't know if people saw it.
Well, I didn't get any questions about it, so I could have looked. All right, so we're going to debit cost of merchandise sold, and we're going to credit our merchandise inventory. We've done these entries before. This is not new.
Please add another entry.
But we're going to have another entry, yes.
And we're going to date it because that's probably us engagable.
Also on the 20th, we're going to debit delivery expense for $35 and credit cash pays. It's on that one. But it's a separate transaction because they're actually, the first one they're making a sale. The second one here, they're actually cutting a check to UPS to pay for that shipping. Now they agreed to pay the shipping costs. And so.
Well, that makes sense to expenses as well.
Yeah.
All right.
I mean, you could probably do it one of several ways, but that's the way they tell you to do it.
That's the way accountants want it done. That's the way it's going to be done.
So, there are situations like I said, you buy a pair of shoes from Nike online and they charge you shipping. Well, you're the one that's having to ultimately pay the shipping costs, but you're not the one that's going to pay their UPS bill. They're going to pay it. So it's kind of like they're handling that delivery on your behalf because they're going to ship it to you and you're going to reimburse them shipping costs. They'll pay the freight company. So that's extremely common. So we'll look at that in a minute and how that's treated.
You also see like if you have like Prime or like Amazon Prime or something, you're paying them that extra amount per month.
Yeah,
so
we pay them
shipping.
$120 a year, and they pay their shippers, their freight people, and we're not supposed to pay freight, but you know, if it's something that's not covered, then you
but it's not a Prime sale, but.
Okay, so often the seller will pay the freight bill for the buyer and will include this cost on the buyer's invoice. So like you buy a pair of shoes online and paying shipping for them, that's a prime example. Because you're not paying UPS or FedEx to deliver it to you. They're paying that, but they're going to get it back from you by charging you for it. But it's not built into the cost of your product. It's an extra expense that they're adding on. So you can see it on your bill. You can see the shipping costs. Okay, so when we have a sale of merchandise with freight costs and the seller is paying the freight for the buyer, those freight costs will be added to the buyer's bill, just like yours, you know. Okay, so there is no discount on freight. So when you're calculating discounts, when you get a problem here in a few minutes where you have not only freight terms, but credit terms and all that good stuff, don't add the freight into the amount that you're calculating a discount on. They don't discount freight, okay? I don't think this problem has that involved, but I'm just going to go ahead.
Example 19 will have more about that.
Yeah, it's in there. I wouldn't have said it. All right, so let's assume merchandise was sold as follows. Okay, so that means we're the seller, doing it from the seller's perspective. You're going to have to get in the habit of when you read these problems. Okay, so which perspective are we recording the entry from? We're the seller because it says sold. If it says purchase, then you're the purchaser. And you're doing inventory and accounts payable or cash. We're the seller, so we'll have that 4-part, or those 2 entries with 2 parts, 4-part entry, whatever you want to say. So Baker Company sold $900 in merchandise to Ivy on account. Terms, FOB Shipping Point. So who's responsible for the freight?
The buyer.
When it says FOB Shipping Point, the buyer has to pay the freight some way or another, whether they have to pay it on the invoice or they pay it directly to their freight carrier. And it can go both ways. I've seen it done both ways. With my grandparents' company, a lot of times we would pay UPS for bringing us stuff, or it would be on the bill. Sometimes we have like huge deliveries and we have to pay like, is it CTL? Is that a freight company? I can't remember. One of those big, like a big truckload of stuff, we'd have to pay them a separate freight bill for bringing our stuff to us. So it's just depends on the circumstances. All right, so we've got the sale of $900 and the cost of merchandise sold $620. So let's record that first. So what are we going to debit? They sold it on account. When you sell something on account, accounts receivable, that goes along with sales and revenue. You are selling something to a customer or you're doing some work for them, but you'll be receiving money. Okay, so that was $900. And then we'll credit our sales account for $900. Okay, so let's put the date on this next one. We'll do our what next? Cost of merchandise sold. And it is $620. And we'll credit inventory. So you're costing out your merchandise. So you got to take it out of your inventory. You're moving it. You're showing that it's moving out. $620. All right. So the next transaction on the 24th, Baker Company. Now, which one's Baker? They're the seller. Baker Company paid freight of $55 to UPS, which was added to the invoice. So the cost of merchandise sold total will be $685. But we're going to make, since we're the seller, we're going to call it. No. Wait a minute. Sorry. Back up. We're adding it to. Sorry. We're adding it to the invoice. So we're going to actually call this we're adding it to their bill. I'm sorry, I had to think for a second. Instead of calling it delivery expense, we're adding it to what they owe us. We're not taking an expense for it. We're adding it to their bill. And so the cost of merchandise sold is, and this is like for the customer. Because they're going to get billed for $685 worth of, that's going to be their cost. Well, no, that doesn't make sense either.
Your math.
No, it's not that. I'm just saying that doesn't need to be on there. So just take that off. That's confusing. Plus, it is the wrong amount. Yes. So take that off. Strike that. All right. So we're going to add it to what they owe us. We're not going to claim an expense for that. We're going to bill the customer for it. And since we're paying UPS directly, we're going to credit cash. That's when you're adding it to their bill and getting it back from them.
So it's ignore the 685?
Yeah, just scratch that out. That needs to come off. That's confusing. Scratch that line off.
Incorrect math too.
Yeah, it is incorrect math. I'm not sure what I was thinking on that one.
It was late at night, and you didn't use a
Probably.
calculator.
My Adderall had worn off because ADD was kicking back in. So yeah, let's just take this stuff off and just strike through all this. That last sentence, strike it off. It's confusing. We're looking at this from the seller's point of view. So cost of merchandise sold is going to be what it is, and we're adding that 55. We're not going to use, you're either going to be calling it delivery expense or you're going to be putting it in the receivable to bill them back for it. If we're the ship as FOB shipping destination, so it starts to get confusing. You have to think about what you're doing. If it's FOB destination, we're going to call it delivery expense. If it's FOB shipping point and the buyer's responsible for it, we're going to add it to their bill by doing this. So it'll either be accounts receivable or delivery expense from the seller's viewpoint. Just depends on, it takes some concentration. You got to kind of go through and go, okay, what's happening here? You know, mark this off. We're going to practice it though, so don't worry. All right, now these are some problems similar to what you're going to have. You're going to have some like this in your homework. So I went ahead and kind of tried to duplicate it so you could see what the heck to do with it. Now, this is what you're going to have here at the top, and you're going to have the question, determine the amount to be paid in full settlement of each. We've got two different problems of two invoices, and you know, so you've got one blank that says how much you've got to pay out for this invoice, and then you'll have this. This is worksheet stuff that I've drafted, okay? So when you get to your homework, you'll see this and a blank, okay? Remember that you can take this right here and plug it in, plug your numbers into it, okay? I want to say I have a blank copy of that somewhere that I can give you to work your homework with. Okay, so in the first one, we've got two examples here. We've got this one and this one, A and B. All right, so for A, we've got to, when it says determine the amount to be paid in full settlement of the invoice, how much are you going to owe on the invoice? How much we got to pay to get this invoice taken care of? That's what they're asking. And then B, we're assuming that the credit for returns and allowances was received prior to all invoices being paid, and that all invoices were paid within the discount period. So we're not going to have to deal with discount or return. And anyway, let's just kind of go through the motions. This worksheet should help you, unless I've made a mistake that I don't realize yet. All right, so first line says invoice amount or the cost of the merchandise purchase. So how much would that be? Just looking at this, how much is the cost of my merchandise?
75,000.
75,000. So we're just going to go through here and fill in the blanks. Okay. So how much is my discount if I pay early? Okay, well, it is 1%, so you can fill that in, times $75,000, right? So it would be 750?
750.
So this is a subtraction mark we're going to call. We're going to put that under the 75,000. So the next line, it says how much is due just on the invoice if we pay it in the discount period.
74,250.
So if we pay the invoice on the merchandise in the discount period, we'll pay 74,250. All right, now our freight terms are FOB destination. So who is responsible for paying the freight?
The seller.
The seller. Now, if the seller is responsible for paying the freight, how much does the buyer pay? Not a trick question, really.
Nothing.
I'm just trying to get you to think through it. If the seller has to pay for the freight, how much does the buyer pay?
Nothing.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why I want you to think about this. There's a line here for it, but because it's FOB destination, the seller pays nothing, okay? Now, there is an amount on here, freight paid by seller. But if it's FOB destination, you're not going to use that number, okay? So that's why I just go through each one. So now we're at the point where total invoice amount is paid within the discount period. We didn't have to add the freight, so we'll just bring our number down. Now, they've made a return, and according to the instructions, all this was done before the invoice was paid, so we're going to take it into consideration. So let's figure out our discounted return, since this is, we've already figured out the discount and the merchandise. So we'll take our return amount here, 10,000, and then we'll subtract our discount, which would be 10,000 times 1%. So it'd be 9,900, right? 10,000 times 1%, 9,900. So again, this is a subtraction mark. So subtract that discounted return from your discounted merchandise, and what do you get? 64,350. It's all right. Okay. All right. So there's your answer. This is how much you will pay to satisfy that invoice. Now that may be a long roundabout way of doing it, and you don't have to use that worksheet. If that worksheet confuses you, just toss it. I mean, it's meant to be a helpful tool. If it's not a helpful tool, then ditch it. Because you're not going to have this on your homework. This is just my way of trying to show you how to calculate it. I mean, essentially, you're going to do it the same way we did our journal entries. You got a purchase that's got a discount. So we'll record it at the discounted amount. Then you return something. So you have to subtract it at the discounted amount. How much do you pay? If you wanted to, you could say 75,000 minus 10,000 equals 65,000. And then look at the shipping. Are we paying it or not? We're not in this case. So we can go ahead and subtract the discount, which would be 65,000 times 1%, which is 650. Does that come out right?
Yeah, it does.
And you're going to get the same answer. If that's easier for you to look at, then do it that way. Okay? Whatever works for you. It's kind of like that homework problem where we took the total invoice and just went ahead and subtracted out the return, then counted, calculated the discounted amount, because we weren't having to make journal entries, so we could just kind of go through it like this. The only time and if we had freight that the buyer was responsible for, we could add it on the tail end. You could add it at the bottom. You just have to figure the discount first, then add the freight, because freight's not discounted. Does that make sense? Sometimes I think I overcomplicate it with my worksheets, but everybody thinks differently and everybody processes information differently. That's why I like to give you more than one choice of how to come up with the answer. Okay, so let's look at this next one. First of all, it's FOB Shipping Point. So who has to pay the freight ultimately? The buyer. So this is buyer. So we are going to have to add freight in somewhere. So once you determine that the buyer's got to pay it, if you want to go ahead and fill it in, you can. Or, you can do it like I said over here and just get it roundabout. It's up to you. Do you like the more direct approach or the more roundabout approach? Which one works better? You like this one? What do you like better? See, that's why I do it two different ways. Okay, we'll do it both ways. If this one confuses you, ignore it. Okay, so the invoice amount is how much?
I feel like telling you that's.
Well, probably because you can do it both ways.
I just don't care.
You're analytical.
Either
I mean,
works.
I know you're analytical, so I'm not really worried about it. I figure you can get it either way. All right, so the discount, if we pay it early, we're going to take 2% of that 135. How much is that? 2,700?
Let's type it in wrong. Yeah.
Y'all, when you have to do stuff in your head, you get so hooked on the calculator that you get to where you can't work without it. And then, because when I first started teaching, I was like, oh my gosh, what is that? And you scratch my head. Now I can do simple calculations in my head again. So I thought, I'm gonna look like a ding dong. I can't even
I
do
can't
that
do
simple
basic
math. Yeah.
algebra.
Well, you know, if you're gonna take 10% would be 13.5 because you just chop off a zero. If it's 1%, you're gonna chop off another zero. So 1% is 13.50, and then you multiply it by 2. So that's my thought process. Okay. So the net amount of the invoice due if we pay it within the discount period is how much?
132.
132?
Yeah.
Okay. So now we're going to add the freight. So we'll have 350. I've got my numbers messed up. No, it's not. It's 550. Let me line these up.
That's what I was like.
I know. I'm a creature of habit. And if I don't do, the visual just wears me out.
And I just looked at it. I'm like, yeah, I could add it in my head, or I could just type it in.
I know, right? I mean, because I don't have it lined up. All right, so at this point, we have freight and we have our discounted merchandise. But now we got to return something. So how much is our return amount going to be? Okay, so $26,460 is our return amount. Okay, so now how much is left to pay? $107.90? Like that?
Yeah.
Okay. Now for you. And they can't see this, so maybe I should do it on my.
They can't see it.
They can't see it because it's on the whiteboard. Let me do it on a blank page so you can see it. Okay, so the other way I'm talking about working this problem. Let's see. And this is the part B on page 14 that we're looking at the top of the page. This is an alternate way to do it without going through that worksheet, because if that worksheet's too much, we'll just pass it. Pass on it. All right, so what we'll do is we'll take our merchandise of 135, subtract our returns. And this is easy because all the returns are being done before the invoice is paid. If they return something after you pay the invoice, then it kind of like, we got to do it a different way. So returns, I'm not going to say allowances, $27,000. So we'll take that away from the original invoice. Is that right? 108. Okay, so let's subtract the discount at this point because we don't want to add freight until we've got everything else figured. We don't discount freight. So our discount of 2% is going to be how much? It'll be 108 times 2%. So that is 3060, 3160. 1080 times 2, how much is that? 108,000 by 2% is what we're doing. This is your discount. I think it's 3160. $21.60. Oops, sorry.
Oops.
This is why we use calculators. $21.60. So we're going to subtract that. That's our discount, and we get
A number.
check my math. Obviously, I make mistakes.
I was gonna say you get an arbitrary number. Oh, yeah, that's right.
All right, so even though the seller paid this freight, they're paying it for the buyer and they're going to bill it to them. So now we're going to add the freight. It's not discounted. We don't want to include it in our calculation for discounting, but we do need to include it in our amount that we're going to pay. So do we get the same amount?
Yes.
So Barry, that makes more sense to you? Yeah, okay. You got all this? Okay. All right, good. I'm glad I addressed it that way. All right, so you've got example 20. It's got 2 scenarios on it. Y'all work through that real quick and let's see how you do on that. You already did it?
Yeah. That's what I was doing. When you work the other way. So we get to journalize for buyers and sellers.
Yes.
See, the thing is, in the real world, you wouldn't, because one person, unless one person worked for both companies, if you wouldn't do both companies.
No, you wouldn't. But
it's good to
yeah,
see.
you would actually, because every company is going to be in both positions.
Oh yeah, recording like what happens whenever you
Right.
make the sale or something like that. Obviously, you're not worried about
the
their
purchaser
books.
or are you the seller?
Yeah, you're not worried about their books. You're just worried about, okay, do the transactions line up
Right.
with what you're showing.
Well, and the thing is, like, I have to buy inventory for my suppliers, and then I'm going to turn around and sell it. So sometimes I'm the buyer, sometimes I'm the seller. So you would
be both buyer and seller. You just wouldn't be displaying like multiple companies.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Like the only thing you care about is if all your stuff lines up with what you're selling to them.
Right.
Or buying from them. I was going to ask you, so Mr. Clark does this, I don't know if you would, but if for whatever reason, like my schedule, I can't like sign up for whatever time you would want your honor students to sign up for.
Yeah.
Could I essentially do like an honors contract? But
I think so, yeah.
because like with Mr. Clark last semester, I didn't even have to fill out an honors contract. They were just telling me like, yeah, just talk to him, and then I talked to him, they're like, yeah,
you can do the honors.
I can do it like an honors contract, but I don't have to sign one because he just counts me as an honors student.
Yeah, I can't remember which class it is. I think it's the later one, but I'm not sure.
Well, I was like, if it's an early one, I don't know if I want to get up at 8 a.m. anymore. Or get up for 8 a.m. classes anymore.
They don't do too well. They're tired.
Yeah, that's why I'm like, next semester I'll be like, no, I'm not gonna take 8 a.m. classes.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's FOB destination, that means the seller doesn't pay for shipping.
If it's FOB destination, then the seller does pay.
So we're not
The
covering
buyer
the
would
cost.
not have to pay for that, huh?
We're not covering the cost of freight.
That's right.
As a buyer,
Freight paid by seller is zero.
That's irrelevant to the invoice, the buyer's invoice. You might be getting, that's why I wanted to kind of do it the same way, because they're going to give you that information. You've got to determine if do I need it or not.
do I need to know if I have to account for this freight?
Right.
Fun stuff. I didn't know we talked about depreciation in macro. That was kind of cool. Well, you brought it up because it's important to like GDP. I didn't realize that. And he was like telling us the definition of depreciation. I'm like, I learned that like half or several weeks ago in accounting.
Yeah, and you're gonna learn to calculate it before the semester's over.
Oh.
Hopefully we have time. I'll cram it in there somewhere.
Calculate is there like a formula?
Oh yeah. There's several different methods.
I assume it's not very accurate.
Well, there's nothing that's gonna be precise. I mean, you can't really.
You just like.
That's kind of difficult. It's all. It's all an estimate.
You're like, this is how long I think this is supposed to last.
Yeah.
I'm going to use that time estimate to calculate depreciation.
That is exactly right.
It's not accurate because, again, you might use it more or less in a given year than you would another year, but you just have to go with it.
That's right. But sometimes, and depending on what they, what kind of industry it is, sometimes like if it's manufacturing or something, they'll calculate depreciation based on how many units it produced, which is probably more accurate.
Yeah, like if you kind of like, because it's going to be like, it's more like instead of a straight line of depreciation, it'll be kind of like
there's one called double declining balance where you have more depreciation at the front end.
It'd be like the square root of a number, like in a graph. Like you would see, like it would start to kind of go down and then it would drop off, like at some point. Because
at some point it's going to get worn out and it's not going to produce as fast or as many as it used to. And
at first it'll be fine for the first couple of years. It'll slowly depreciate, and then it'll like kind of speed up near the end of its lifespan.
Is that the answer to your first one? I'll get that.
Wait, I'm looking at the right page. I'm stupid.
I may have made a mistake, so I mean, if you got something different, let me know.
Yes. Wait. Oh, you're talking about the.
This is A of example 20.
You used 2000.
Oh crap! I used the wrong.
I was like, that's not the right number, and I was like, oh, that's.
I did it at the top too.
Yeah, that's not one.
I have to bend my paper to keep from using the wrong numbers. That's so irritating.
I think it's how.
Huh?
Plus, you didn't even you put 130 down, which is how much you would take from 2000 for the second problem, and then subtract it from anyway. Yeah, all the top part was right. You just.
Yeah, the top part was right.
Oh, this was right?
No, that's 2% of 50,000.
Yes, it was 2,000, 1,000.
Now you're right, rewriting it. You had the right number first.
Crap.
You're confusing yourself.
Yes, I am. It's Friday and my brain is on the down slope.
So 6370 is what should.
So it's coming in, my brain's coming in for a landing for the weekend. Problem is I need to use it this weekend, so. It can't just completely, completely crap out on me. Okay, so this was supposed to be.
That was some layers right there. That's
6,500.
Yeah, if you get one thing wrong,
yes, that's the thing. It's like you can really mess up your problem.
Dude, that reminds me. I don't know if did you ever take chemistry?
Yeah.
So in AP chemistry, we had to do. We had to do pH balances, which are extremely long problems. Like they on the AP test, they literally gave you scratch paper, and it one of those problems would take up like a page or two of scratch paper, like front and back. And if you got one thing wrong, you were done. It was wrong.
That's a truth.
Oh man, I passed that thing. That's all I care about. I don't take chemistry ever again.
I didn't have to take AP chemistry. I just took general.
Well, I mean, this was in high school, and so I was like, I took it with the express intention of never wanting to take chemistry again.
I took chemistry 1 and 2 in high school, so whatever. Rate pay bestseller 250.
I think you said what they teach in chemistry 2 is what we start learning in honors chemistry, in the first. Basically what we first take before we can take AP Chem.
And I'm cool with that.
Because you have to learn a lot of those concepts before you go into AP Chem, because AP Chem is a headache.
I would have added that instead of subtracted it. So that should be 34 something.
That should be 1960.
This should, oh, no.
So
I'm
you're
calculating the
saying- You're saying,
discount.
yeah, I'm just
Yes.
gonna take.
I'm calculating the discount is what I'm doing and not calculating the net. I'm just doing this part and sticking it out there. Okay, so
Solid.
there is a method to my madness. It's just wrong. Is that right?
Yes.
Good grief, man. Okay, now, do we want to, you want to do it your way? Are you good?
I'm good.
You got the same answer? Okay, good. And that's the thing that I want y'all to do. If you don't, if that doesn't work for you and that's throwing you for a loop, some kind of way I present it to you, you need to tell me because we'll go a different direction. Because I have a really good friend and she can go, like, I think better along this process here. But she's more like your way. Bam, right to the end. Shortest route. And we used to do that in tax, and she'd go, I'd go, da-da-da-da, because the way my mind was, I had to kind of process through the whole thing, get to the end, and she'd go, bam, well, isn't it just this? And I'm like, give me a minute, I gotta process it. I gotta work through the process first. And she's still like that. She's so smart. And so I'm like, you're blowing my mind. Give me just a minute, I gotta go roll that through the machine. So, all right, so let's see, what is next? Okay, so the next thing we'll do next week is just kind of go through some transactions, and we'll have a transaction and we'll look at it from the seller's viewpoint and the buyer's viewpoint. So that will probably help you in the process of analyzing how do I treat this from, determining, what am I doing for which one, depending on what role you're looking at. Let me stop the recording first.